Hi, this is Danielle Moeller, and this is one of two videos that will film my educational terminology assignment. In this video, I'll be going through definitions 1 through 20 of the educational terminology, and I'll be giving definitions for each, sometimes spending a little more time to elaborate on certain terms. So I'll start that now. Number 1 is going to be academic language. So academic language is the necessary language that students must use in school to fulfill assignments. Examples would be like proper use of grammar and content-specific word choice, maybe like SAT words, like expanded vocabulary, usually at a higher level than what the student uses for just usual like social interactions. Number 2 is active learning. So active learning means that the students are responsible for their own learning. So examples would be like speeches, presentations, even collaborating with their own peers. Those would all count as active learning. Passive learning, on the other hand, would be like reading, listening, seeing, probably a product of direct instruction and lecture. Number 3 is adequate yearly progress. Adequate yearly progress is the No Child Left Behind Act's way of keeping schools on track in terms of student performance. So it's based on standardized testing scores and then one additional academic indicator such as graduation rate. So first a baseline is established and then goals are set to ensure that students are reaching benchmarks at certain times. Worth noting is that if schools do not meet their AYP 2 years in a row, the students are notified, the school is determined to be at risk, and the students are given the option to move to a school that is meeting those benchmarks. Number 4 is Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy basically separates student learning objectives into 3 categories, which will be 1 is cognitive, 2 is affective, and then psychomotor. So basically knowledge, attitude, and skills. In each domain there is a hierarchical list of objectives that fall under that category. So objectives that are higher on the list will rely on prior knowledge from the lower in the list to continue building upon those ideas. So of course when you're just starting to teach a class, a baseline should be established with all of your students before moving on to the newer concepts, like finding out where they're at so you can better effectively teach them. Number 5 is brain-based learning. So brain-based learning is curriculum, instructional methods, and lesson plans that are designed to reflect the most recent studies and research on the brain. This gives teacher better insight on how the brain changes with age or how the brain reacts to stress, and it can help to maximize the efficacy of their instruction. Number 6 is collaborative learning. When 2 people learn or attempt to solve a problem together, that's collaborative learning. So an example would be like think, pair, share. Number 7 is constructivism. So constructivism is a theory that proposes students are more actively engaged when they themselves are generating meaning instead of sitting and listening. So maybe guided discovery versus direct instruction. 8 is co-teaching. So that would be when 2 qualified educators teach a single class together, which may or may not be in their content area. An example would be Amy Hamlin and Allison Adrian came together, I think, a few semesters ago to teach a Lady Gaga class. So it wasn't Allison Adrian is in music, and then Amy Hamlin is in art history. So it wasn't necessarily in their content area, but they were able to combine their disciplines and come together to teach a single class. Number 9 is curriculum. So curriculum is the program of study that's used at any type of school. It can also mean the learning objectives that students are meant to fulfill, as well as the actual textbooks and activities used in the class. 10 is differentiated instruction. So differentiated instruction would be a philosophy in education that gives students many options for learning and solving problems based on their own individual needs. So because of this, differentiated instruction is helpful to many types of learning styles. And this is also related to brain-based learning, as we talked about before, as we now know that the brain makes connections in many different ways, as well as there being many types of intelligences. So differentiated instruction could accommodate all of those different intelligences and learning styles. 11 is direct instruction, so lecture or demonstration. It's the teacher teaching the content directly to students in a straightforward fashion. Alright, number 12 is ELL and ESL. So ESL means English as a second language, but this is actually not considered politically correct, as students may have learned other languages as their second language. So as a result, ELL is kind of being used across the board, and that stands for English Language Learner, which means the student is currently learning the English language regardless of prior English experience, language experience. So number 13 is engagement. Engagement is kind of poorly defined, but can usually be summed up as active student participation or student motivation. When a student's engaged, they are interested in the activity at hand and are more likely to learn from it. Number 14 is experiential learning. So that would obviously be like learning by experience rather than being taught the instructions how to do something. So maybe learning to ride a bike in theory might sound pretty easy or even difficult, but then the actual experience of learning is going to be entirely different. It's just something you kind of have to do in order to master a skill. Number 15 is going to be evaluation versus assessment versus grading, and what are the differences between those. Well, evaluation is it can be looked at as like an overall learning experience, like the sum of the learning experience, while assessment measures the progress of the student. Grading, however, does not always imply that students have or have not met learning objectives. Because grading can be based on participation, attendance, assignments. The student might be accomplishing learning objectives, but when all those factors are tied in there, it doesn't really, grading doesn't equal assessment. 16 is gifted and talented. So gifted and talented is kind of like a classroom that educators use to better accommodate students who display a particular talent. That might be leadership, general intellectual ability, creative thinking, etc. But because they have such high potential for learning and may be bored in their other classes, a gifted and talented class may keep them interested and engaged. Number 17 is high-stakes testing. So high-stakes test is going to be a test that will have important outcomes should the student pass or fail. The pass or fail part is important. High-stakes testings are either kind of like a yes or no kind of test. So maybe like driver's tests, theater auditions, whether you're in or out, or maybe even a test that will enable the student to graduate a certain class. Those are all high-stakes tests. 18 is independent study. So independent study is an alternative program of study that is approved by both the teacher and student. In Minnesota, independent study is allowed at the age of 16 or older. An example would be I'm currently doing my field work at Richfield High School, and there's a senior named Tyler who's doing an independent study in ceramics. He's actually going into auto body himself, but he has this particular talent in ceramics, so he was able to manifest that via the independent study. 19 is going to be an IEP versus 504 plan. So what's the difference between those? Well, both of these plans are made so that students with disabilities are enrolled in school and receiving learning accommodations. An IEP will require specialized instruction, but a 504 might not. Both are updated annually to better accommodate the ongoing needs of the student. And then number 20 is going to be indirect instruction. So indirect instruction, which is student-centric, is the opposite of direct instruction, which is teacher-centric. So indirect instruction will rely on the students to formulate ideas and solve problems.